Now, President Cyril Ramaphosa has announced government's latest timeline for the years-long delayed digital migration project. He has promised a switch over from analog TV transmitters to digital as soon as next month. Now, the move will be done province by province and is expected to be completed by March of next year.
After many delays, we will begin the phased switch off of our analog TV transmitters from next month. It is anticipated that this process, which will be done province by province, will be completed by the end of March in 2022. The process for the licensing of high-speed spectrum is at an advanced stage. We hope that the ongoing litigation amongst interested parties on the licensing matter will provide certainty and will not unduly delay the spectrum auction process that we've decided on.
The SA Chamber of Commerce has welcomed the President's State of the Nation address, which focused on economic recovery plans. The organization has, however, raised concerns over what it says is the lack of an execution plan. Chamber of Commerce CEO Alan Mokoki also questioned whether the country has enough funds to implement the recovery plan, which will reduce the reliance on imports and increase energy supply.
I think that it's good that the president has gone out there, put his neck on the block and communicated something useful, something I would think was chewable in terms of its bits and bytes. However, the main question will always remain, which is what we normally do. This president has probably done 3 of these now, SONA since 2018 or some of thereabouts. And I think that what is always missing in a lot of these plans is where is the execution plan, the outcome part of it, right? So the planning part, the vision, the objectives, all these things, if in fact they were going to happen, they would really be very good. But do we have the capability, do we have the capacity in the state machinery to be able to deliver on that? I think the jury is still very much out on that particular piece.
Now, Mokoki further called for the reconfiguration of the state. He says government should ensure that the right people are hired for the public service. Ramaphosa promises to crack down on no-performing public servants last night, but several business organizations have pointed out that this commitment has been made in the past to no avail.
What you are trying to always avoid is to have cognitive fog when you've communicated a plan, that you need to get very early, nice and early, into a phase where you can say, I have this particular project on the table, these are the people who are running it, this is the amount of money that's been allocated, this is the type of system that we're going to run, here is the plan, here's the timeline in terms of how long it's actually going to take to deliver. And I think that we've struggled in terms of that particular aspect of it, and we do need to resource. And that's why we've called very clearly as the South African Chamber of Commerce and Industry for a meritorious public service. In other words, that one of the structural reforms that is urgent and required today is to reconfigure the state machinery and in particular the personnel, the skills, the competencies in the public sector so that you can move very fast into a merit-based type system. Because if you don't do that, we will continue to have plans and we don't actually have people who can actually deliver on those particular plans.
Now, to talk more about the government's latest timeline for the years-long delayed digital migration project, we join now by Mr. William Bird. He's the director at the Media Monitoring Africa. Very good evening to you, Mr. Bird. Thank you so much for your time. So we did hear some definite timelines from the president regarding digital migration from analog to digital. He said by March of next year that we should be completely digitized. How possible is this? What type of progress has already been made in this regard?
Well, look, let's be clear. It is an essential step that needs to be taken. It's a series of steps that I think we were due to have completed around 10 years ago. So, better late than never, but whether or not they're ready to start, I think he announced that they would start in March this year, switching off one province at a time. It is an essential thing that has to happen. Whether we're ready for it now, I very much doubt that, unfortunately. I think that there's still far too many millions of South Africans that rely on analog signals. So to suggest that we're going to be able to just do that now is difficult. Plus, there's the fact that one of the mobile operators, MTN, is still involved in quite a significant legal challenge with the regulator ICASA around the spectrum auction. So it's not even clear that that is going to take place. So this really, this is a process that's been beset by disaster and befuddlement and bad things for almost a decade.
And I'd like to focus, Mr. Bird, on those two impediments that you've just highlighted now. The first one being whether or not the majority of South Africans have the capacity, the capability, the infrastructure to be able to move from analog to digital. Talk us through the practicalities of what would be needed for this change to be implementable.
Well, we were meant to have this thing called DTT, which is digital terrestrial television. And that kind of window period has now passed. The technology's all just moved on there. Most of your television sets and all of these things come equipped with things already built into them. The idea of having that kind of a set-top box being distributed to people it just seems almost antiquated now, So the issue is that you've got to make sure that the poorest of the poor and that those who don't have the means and the resources to buy digital-ready television sets and the like are able to make sure that they can still have access to media, and in particular the public broadcaster, for example. So for that to happen, they need to have access to that. And at the moment, there's just no way that is currently the case. So, there are a number of very significant hurdles. I think that it is commendable that government is now putting down a timeline to this, saying we're starting in March. So what we have to do is try and make sure that we hold them to that. It's all very well to critique and say we're not going to get there, which, we may well not get there at the speed at which which we already haven't, but we've got to do it. It's in all of our interests that this happens, and we need to make sure that everyone plays their part in making it happen.
You really highlighted the issue of affordability there, Mr. Bird, for the majority of South Africans. They literally will have to throw away their old, television sets and be able to acquire new ones. But let's look at the state of the public broadcaster. We know that they are still pretty much in shambles right now, trying to restructure themselves. Are they in a position, both capacity-wise and financially, to be able to carry this burden, really, for them, but a much-needed one too?
So just to be clear, people who already have analog television sets, they don't need to throw them away. They can get a set-top box and plug that in. So let's not encourage people to start destroying their old tech just yet. But certainly in regards to the SABC, it's essential that they make this transition. And to a large degree, they already have, because they're already on platforms like OpenView, like DSTV, etc., and they're already broadcasting digitally anyway. So to that extent, that's not going to make that much of a significant difference to them. Whether or not the SABC is sustainable economically now at the moment is a very different question. That's why there's this big white policy paper process that's going on. There's talk of a public broadcasting act that's going to be released. So, again, these are changes that we should have been making decades ago. And the fact that we haven't is, I think, incredibly embarrassing for our nation, that we haven't made sure that everyone has access to the internet, that we haven't made sure that we switched off the signal 10 years ago like we should have. So we a decade behind where we should be. And at this time, when we're in this moment of crisis with this pandemic, for us to not have that means that many more millions of South Africans are being denied access to a lot more news and information that they otherwise could have access to.
You mentioned the set-top boxes. If you could update us as to where we are right now. We know that when Nomvula Mokonyane was heading the department, there was another revised plan that was put in place that pretty much removed government in the procurement of set-top boxes and the distribution thereof. What is the current status of that arrangement with set-top boxes?
So those particular set-top boxes for DTT, the reality is they're not the answer to making sure that people in rural areas get access to television. The answer there is through satellite TV. The answer there is to, in fact, options through OpenView or MultiChoice and DSTV. They're the ones they've got it. DSTV is already in 8 million homes. They've got the infrastructure, they've got the know-how. DTT and those particular set-top boxes will work in urban areas where you've already got the signal distributors to make sure that people actually can receive them on those older style formats. The reality is for everyone to have universal access, for them to receive it digitally. We need to look at a combination of those things, and that means we've got to look to the satellite providers. Those are going to be the ones that are going to help get it to people in rural areas where they currently can't get anything.
The President mentioned yesterday the court case that's currently between ICASA and MTN. How is that likely to impede the rollout and the move from analog to digital?
Well, it's significant because, of course, that's for the spectrum. So the mobile operators, they talk about this thing, the digital dividend, and what that means is the spectrum that's going to become freed up. One of the reasons they're saying that the mobile operators have said for years that our data is so expensive is because they don't have access to that additional spectrum. So part of that is once you give people greater access to data and it's a lot cheaper, you can roll it out, they can get access to all of these digital means anyway. So theoretically, we should all start to reap the benefits of that. Of course, the real problem comes in when you start to say, well, how on earth do you auction that off? And you've already seen, I think it was last year, that announced that it was going to take place. There was a legal challenge then from some of the mobile operators. Then they came out with this new format, and we've seen that MTN is saying, well, we're not happy with this and we will take you to court. So it means that the regulator, until they find some kind of a magic mix that's going to keep all of the various players happy, as South Africans, we're going to be the ones that lose out, and government is going to be further hampered in their plans of being able to get rid of the analog signal.
What ICASA had done is they put MTN and Vodacom and classified them as Tier 1. They put Telkom and Cell C under Tier 2. In layman's terms, what does this mean and what are the implications of being in either one of these tiers?
So at the moment, the way it affects things most primarily is around the access to the spectrum and who's going to get access to it and at what point they get access to it. So what ICASA was trying to do was to say, well, we just don't want the big players, being Vodacom and MTN, coming in and buying up all the spectrum because they can afford the highest price, right? So they said, if we do this way, then theoretically, if you put the bigger ones in that first tier and the smaller ones in the second tier, then you hopefully start to give the smaller ones a bit more of a chance at getting more of the spectrum. But of course, what MTN is saying is that this unfairly prejudices them and their ability to get involved in it, and they worry that by the time they have a chance then to get involved in the spectrum auction, that the key spectrum that they're looking for will no longer be there. So, they're protecting their commercial interest, and ICASA is trying to find a way of making sure that you don't just have the dominant players dominating again.
Worst case scenario, Mr. Bird, should this legal tussle continue for an extended period of time, in a practical way, how is it going to impact the President's plans for this digital migration and accessibility of the digital infrastructure for South Africans?
Well, it means that if you continue not to release that spectrum, it means that the abilities of the operators to make sure that there's more, that they can have more access to data, that they can use all the latest equipment, et cetera, and spread their signal further and get lower data prices. If you don't do that, then it means you're keeping us back where South Africans are then still experiencing high data costs and they still don't have access to digital, either through their mobile devices or their other digital devices or through traditional broadcast spectrum networks. So to that extent, it's almost certain that it will negatively impact their planned rollout. Against that, of course, is the fact that if they go with a hybrid model and they start making sure that they dump this idea of DTT and they start going just DTH, so the satellite options, that then they can actually start to roll things out and they may be in a better position to start to switch off analog. Again, as we've said, it's it's an imperative for all of us. It's in everyone's interest ultimately that we do this, faster and earlier than later. But that requires a lot of players to contribute and come to the party. Whether they are willing, all of them, to do that at this stage isn't clear.
Mr. William Bird, thank you so much for that insight. Mr. Bird is Director at the Media Monitoring Africa and really giving us the ABCs of that migration from analog television to digital.